Good afternoon to everyone watching this broadcast, and good afternoon, commissioners and staff. We are now resuming our Tuesday, November 9th, 2021 regular meeting. We are on item 11, Public Works, and we're beginning with a work session on permitting challenges and proposed process improvements within the Land Management Division. I know that Mr. Miller is here, but Mr. Mokrzycki, did you want to introduce the topic?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just say that this is coming back to you as a discussion that we've had with the board and an assignment from the board to look at our permitting processes. I know Keir will talk about this, but we had sort of a perfect storm of challenges over the course of the past year between the pandemic and remote work, the holiday farm fire, and the significant increase in number of residents that required really rapid response to the need for rebuilding there, and heavy demand and understaffing. And so Keir and the team will walk through what we've done to address these issues and the path that we're on, but know that our team is very much committed to continuing to improve. We've seen some really strong improvements happen in terms of our permits. And I'll just say that we've got an incredible team in land management with Keir and Amber and Lindsay and the whole group, led by Dan Hurley as our department director. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Keir unless Dan would like to add anything else.
I'm not sure if Dan is on right now, Steve. So
yeah, go ahead, Keir. It's all you.
Great. Thanks, and good afternoon, commissioners. Chair Bernie, thanks for having me here for this work assignment. Coming back to you all, this is actually something that land management had wanted to come back and discuss with the board as soon as our operation somewhat normalized from some of the challenges that Mr. Mokrzycki just mentioned. We're starting to come out of that period now. Our initial response to the holiday farm fire, and with our lobby back open, teleworking staff back in the office, things are beginning to somewhat normalize. So this was certainly at the forefront of our minds, to come back and check in with the board and report on some process improvements that really started in earnest a few years ago prior to the disruptions of the last 18 months. So I will go ahead and just get into it. The first thing I want to cover is just kind of the big picture. As the board is very well aware, you hear from residents who've been working with the Land Management Division, trying to work their way through the complex permitting process, and we cannot always meet the customer service expectations of those folks. There are a lot of concerns about the permitting process, primarily about the length of time, complexity with the process, red tape, challenges with communication. We're well aware of the concerns. We're committed to trying to find solutions to address these concerns. So our current objective is really to reduce that frustration that our applicants feel and to provide exceptional customer service to everyone. The solution as we see it and as we've been working towards is there's no silver bullet. It's sort of constant iterative series of incremental improvements. There's lots of different initiatives. There's lots of different strategies we can employ, and we'll talk about those this afternoon. And then finally, a really key part of this work is developing some very measurable key performance indicators, some metrics that can help us understand, how we're doing. And that work is ongoing right now as well. So that's big picture. To kind of lead it off, I was going to, kind of state the obvious, and Steve already mentioned this, that we do need to recognize that although there have always been challenges with customer service and land management in the many years I've been here, there's always difficulties. They predate, these recent disruptions. So, and by no means am I suggesting that we're facing challenges because of what's occurred over the last 8 months. There were issues that were ongoing prior to this, but we really were and still are in many ways in a very unique situation with trying to provide quality customer service to our residents because of a multitude of reasons. The increase in workload, the inability to serve customers face-to-face, over-the-counter, in public, teleworking staff, working with a public that doesn't have access to, all of the consultants and qualified professionals that they normally do, just because the market is so hot right now, and those folks are really at a premium. And then really struggling with applicants, trying to help them through the process who've never gone through the building permit process before. I'm referring to the residents upriver who lost their homes, who were kind of caught unawares and really kind of thrown into this head first. And there were a lot of concerns and fears early on about getting permits into the pipeline quickly so they could lock in those development rights before, non-conforming use laws changed. There were a number of concerns and fears that really drove land management to just be kind of inundated with incomplete permit submittals, which really, caused a lot of the issues that we saw this past 18 months or so, and especially this last year since the fire. And then finally, Steve mentioned this as well, there's been a really high vacancy rate in the land management division. I mentioned it in the board packet. We've filled 24 vacancies over the last 12 months. So quite a number of vacancies in a organization that until the past year only had 37 FTE. That's a sizable chunk of our staff. So this next series of graphics here will just kind of display some of the information that I think is important to understand as we kind of move forward. This chart right here shows the number of building permit submittals we've seen going back about 5 years. You'll see a very interesting, right as the COVID kicked off and our lobby closed down and there were concerns over, pretty dramatic slowdown in the economy, we started to see permits drop off in the third and fourth quarter of FY19. But you'll see right shortly after the Holiday Farm Fire, they really spiked. And this isn't just because of the applications coming in because of the Holiday Farm Fire. This is universal. We're in talking with my counterparts across the state, permit volumes just kind of went off the charts. There was pent-up demand because of the pandemic, and then there's just the housing market is hot. So we saw our busiest year and busiest quarter of permits going back to when, the housing boom of 2006 or so, with just a massive number of building permit submittals this past year. As you can see, we had 5,492 building permit applications issued in the last year, higher than, going back. On this chart, it shows going back to FY 12-13. These are some numbers that demonstrate where planning applications have been throughout this time. You'll see sort of in the center of the chart, this area that's circled right here is, that's when our lobby closed down. That's when we started to see the impacts of the Holiday Farm Fire. You'll see prior to that, and I should back up, this chart shows the number of planning applications, type 1 planning applications received each month, and the number of permits issued each month. And you can see that there's more or less a pretty equal distribution. Some months we receive more, some months we issue more, but that's more or less, shows that as permits come in, they're also being processed and moving out. That starts to go a little sideways here when our lobby closed down and we couldn't work directly with customers. Our submittals became, not as complete, and challenges really started to occur. And then once the fire hit and we saw that dramatic increase in permit activity, planning permits were the first thing to be received after the fire. You can see those numbers just get really out of balance right here. And we just start seeing way more permits issued than are going out the door. But slowly over the course of several months, as the board allocated more resources for the division, we began to staff up, and you see these numbers coming back up again. This year, they've started to, we're seeing a reduction in permit activity. However, still seeing a very robust, the first quarter of this year was still the strongest quarter we've seen in quite some time. And then here's a slightly promising trend here that we are actually issuing more permits that are coming in as well. This chart just shows the number of inquiries that our builder on duty, this is like our call line for our building questions that they receive. higher number of calls than we've had in recent years. And the blue indicates the number of visitors that we see in the lobby, and the red is the number of actual phone calls or emails that come in. You can see when our lobby closed down, we cut off visitation, and most of our customer service was done over the phone, which is really, when you're working with building permits and complex planning applications, that's not an efficient way to transact with customers. There's really a lot of challenges to trying to work over the phone to get complete submittals. So you can see very high permit activity this last year and high customer service requests. So, you know, in the memo, I kind of broke down the challenges that we face into two sort of buckets. There's the systemic challenges that are more or less set by things that are somewhat out of our control, not completely, but there are a number of issues that we can't always control. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on those, but I do want to just highlight them, because as commissioners, you will hear about these concerns from your constituents. And it's just good to be aware of the things that we can and can't control, so we can focus our resources where they have the most bang. And I really want to spend some time talking about our operational challenges that we are working towards. So I think as many of you are aware, especially the rural commissioners, Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Bozovich, you're aware that with the rural Oregon land use system, it's a challenge to develop rural properties. We can't always get to yes. We do everything in our power to be solution oriented and to strive to find a win-win for our customers. But sometimes that answer is no, just based on the rules that are in place. That's often a challenge with our customers, and no matter what level of customer service we provide them, if you can't get somewhere close to what they're hoping for, it's going to be difficult, you know, working with those folks. The second is the development review process is just complex. We're aware of this. We've made many efforts over the years, system redesigns, process improvements, external consultants trying to streamline, make our process as lean as possible, try to make it, simplify it. But, you know, just all the rules, statutes, planning goals that are in place makes it a complex system. That's not an excuse. It's still on staff. It's incumbent upon us to try to explain that system, to try to make it as clear as possible for the public, but it is inherently complex. Again, rural development, it's not the same as developing in the cities. Lots of folks that we talk with say, you know, I was able to go to the city, pull a permit. Granted, it was much more expensive in the city, but it wasn't all the hassle and issue. Well, that's because the Oregon land use system really is intended and designed for the majority of development to occur inside of urban growth boundaries. Some limited development is allowed outside of UGBs, but it's a much more difficult process to work through. Obviously, this is a contentious business, and oftentimes we deal with really, you know, challenging, sticky problems, planning applications that go sideways. And sometimes, no matter what staff do, at the end of the day, you're going to be upsetting, you know, some portion of the residents out there, depending on whether the answer is yes or no. And then, of course, there are market factors at play, especially like this year, for example, with just a pretty dramatic housing boom, increase in permit activity. These are things where it's difficult to be positioned to respond nimbly to those, when you're trying to manage a budget and have adequate staffing. So things like that, things like the, you know, the high cost of lumber goods, you know, that really is driving this frenetic pace. Residents are really trying to lock in, you know, lumber packages. So they're trying to get the permits as quickly as possible. It creates a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety on buyers. And then, of course, there's always outliers. We talked about some of these when we presented some of the permitting work that's going on upriver with the Holiday Farm Fire, demonstrating sort of where the planning applications fall in that process. There's always going to be these things that don't fit neatly. There's not clean solutions to all of the problems. And the board will hear about these situations that just don't, there isn't a really easy or obvious answer for some problems out there. Of course, it's staff's responsibility to do everything that we can to try to work through those difficult issues, but sometimes those are also the issues that get the most publicity and the most attention. So operationally, there's a number of things that we are working to improve and that we can improve. The biggest one that we're aware of, and I'm sure the board is as well, is the concern over wait times for permits. Lengthy permit processing times is the number one concern that we've heard in the division. It's the main source of frustration with applicants, and it's one of the main things that we can affect. However, it's not unique to Lane County. I just want to point out that delays in the permitting process are occasionally universal. These are just some, just quick clips that I grabbed in 5 minutes off of the internet of headlines about permitting challenges around the Northwest in the last year. A lot of other organizations have these similar problems, especially when there's, a booming economy like there is right now in the housing market. So it's not a unique problem. And it's one that's been going on for a while. And really what's important to understand is, why is it happening? Why does it take so long to get a permit? And what can we do to address that? There was a study commissioned by the American Institute of Architects back in the 90s, which still is very, as I read through it, it has a lot of value for today. It kind of points out some of the issues. The study was commissioned, as I said, by the Institute of Architects to try to figure out what are the factors that lead to delays in building permit processes. And it's interesting, one of the key findings was that there's a lot of responsibility, I want to call it blame. There's a lot of blame to go around, and it's not solely on the permitting office. There's really a number of factors involved. The application for a building permit is a complex undertaking with a lot of moving parts. It involves designers, property owners, developers, contractors, even, at the state level with legislators who set the rules. And of course, building departments, we all have a role in this. We all have a part to play. Some of the other findings is that it's really the lack of understanding about the process is one of the biggest reasons for delay. Residents who don't understand, all of the moving parts, the sort of order of operations of how to get a building permit, the pre-application conference, the land use permits, then they submit for the building permits with all the associated pieces, the engineering analysis, the geotech requirements. Understanding about the process is one of the reasons for delay. Poor communication is another big one. We've seen quite a bit this past year. And I know that certain commissioners have seen these. I'll get an email from a commissioner saying, could you please look into this? My constituents having, issues with their building permit. I go down the sort of forensically putting together what's going on with this permit, what's the line of communications that's been occurring. And pretty quickly, you can see that there's often a breakdown in communication somewhere. It's not always on with staff. Most of the times that we're seeing that there's some lack of coordination between the homeowner and their contractor or design engineer. A lot of times a permit will be in with the county. We are waiting on additional information to be submitted by the designer or contractor, and the homeowner isn't aware of that. They're not aware that, the county is waiting on engineering from the contractor. And so they've got their wires crossed and there's not always clear communication. And then another issue that the report calls the volleyball effect. This is something that we struggle with a lot. And it's really that if you get an incomplete permit application in, it can create this sort of spiraling iterative process where it's a back and forth with the applicant, trying to get the information that we need to get a permit out the door. So that, again, that term, the volleyball effect, was coined in the 90s. The problem still persists. We're still seeing it nowadays. Just as a kind of quick example here of some of the challenges we see, this is sort of a diagram of the application process. And one of the breakdowns and one of the areas of improvement is we can do a lot better demonstrating the public how the process works. We can provide better tools and applications to help them understand where they're at in the process, permit process, and we can provide better tracking of that. One issue that this would help to alleviate is some of the expectations. Applicants will come in, they'll talk to staff, they'll say, we want to start a permit on something, and we initiate what's called an inquiry record. This is just sort of a tracking record so we can track all of the discussions that have happened with an applicant. They're assigned this inquiry record number so they can reference that in the future with, future conversations with staff. That really sort of sets the expectations. They think, okay, I've got this tracking number. I've got this, is this a permit number? They think they're in the system. So that's when the expectations begin. And especially when they actually drop off an application, they think, okay, my permit's in the system and the clock is ticking. In reality, we're doing, a completeness review. We're finding out that there could be many missing submittals. They haven't even paid a fee yet at this point. It's finally when we're through with the application completeness review, we call and we get fees collected. Step 4 is where our permit review process often begins. And then our permit is reviewed and issued after that. Between step 4 and step 5, as the board has heard about over the last year, our typical building permit review process is 4 to 6 weeks. Oftentimes, unfortunately, though, between step 1 and step 5, you'll see a process that goes on for 3, 4, 5 months. And that's a challenge. And explaining that challenge to the public and trying to get better submittals early on is something that we can do better at. So again, inadequate submittals, better transparency is needed, better tools to help applicants understand where they're at in the process. Between Dan Hurley and Steve Mokrahysky and myself, we've been calling it sort of the Domino's Pizza model, where you submit for a pizza online. You can see on your phone, the pizza's in the oven, the pizza's out for delivery, the pizza's at your door. There are things like that. There are these tools that we can develop that can really help people understand better where they're at in the permitting process. And then, improving communication as well. These are things that we can absolutely address, and I'll talk about how we're doing that. Final kind of operational challenge that I just want to mention is, it's a resource challenge. This chart shows LMD, the FTE and LMD going back to kind of the peak of the housing boom in the 2000s, when we had a staff of 42.5 FTE. Pretty radically, that we laid off about half of our division when the housing market crashed. We've slowly built back over the years with some ups and downs. Finally, prior to the addition of 10 FTE by the board this past year, we were at 37 FTE, which is a really great place to be after a long time of having so few staff. However, I'll point out that 37 FTE was still 5.5 FTE of where we were back in the mid-2000s. With the addition of these 10 new staff, we're finally in a good position with staffing. However, I'll say that with these 10 staff comes that increased workload of the Holiday Farm fire. But really, these staff are dedicated to working on those permits. So even though we have more staff now, there's much higher workload. And just as a comparison, again, I'll mention that the market is hot regardless of these permits that we're seeing. There's a lot of activity going on. Deschutes County, for example, 2 years ago, they had 55 FTE within their building and planning program. Very similar model that we have with building, sanitation, planning, and code compliance all under one roof. They have 55 FTE. In the last year, they've added 10 FTE, but they don't have a Holiday Farm fire that they're contending with. So just want to point that out, that the additional staff is critical for long-term efficacy and for our ability to meet those customer service demands. I really feel that retaining something close to this level of staffing is going to be necessary even past the Holiday Farm fire. Of course, things are dependent on the market. If things, dramatically slow down, we'll readjust. But where things are right now, I feel like staffing is a critical issue. Of course, there's always things that we can do to be leaner, to be more efficient. But without staff, and frankly, we've had just such a basic level of staffing for so long. Without that staffing, some of these improvements are a challenge. So talking about improvements, and I apologize, it looks like we're running a little long on time here, or short on time. I'll try to get through this pretty quickly. We've been working on a number of improvements over the years. These started prior to the Holiday Farm fire. Innovations continued during COVID with our lobbies closing down. And now again, as operations normalize, we're going to be working on just a range of enhancements. Some of the quick highlights, these are explained in detail in the memo, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but we have been doing a number of efforts on our planning side, on our building side. Of course, the very robust code modernization project. This has been going on for a number of years, trying to make our code more user-friendly for the public. That's really where it starts. A number of enhancements in our building program. We've established a quick start building review process, working on concurrent review so applicants can submit land use permits and building permits simultaneously. We've acquired a range of technologies to help applicants gather information online, better research tools online. We've implemented a virtual queuing software for residents in our customers in our lobby. We've updated our tracking protocols. We've redesigned how we assign permits to planners, so there's more kind of understanding and accountability. Just a range of solutions. We've implemented electronic plan review and started working on remote building inspections. We continue to work with technology services to develop Tableau dashboards that are going to help sort of showcase the key performance indicators that we're coming up with, which we'll talk about. And one of the biggest enhancements that I see is we're really moving into a next generation of permit software. We're calling it the Citizen Platform. We currently have an RFI out right now for a vendor to try to identify a vendor. And what this new sort of software will do, it will be an online permit application guide. A number of jurisdictions are moving in this direction, where it's really an online tutorial that helps applicants work their way through these complex applications. It has the ability to have prompts and cues and helps people really submit a more complete application online. So there's not the back and forth with staff as much, and we get a more complete product that we can then move forward and process quicker. Along with that, there will be a citizen portal where they'll have the ability to have that sort of Domino's Pizza status checking screen that I mentioned. So we're in the initial stages of vendor selection for that software right now. There's a number of efforts that we want to engage in moving on in the next several months that I discuss in the memo in more detail. But really, one of the things we began doing under COVID and with the holiday farm fire is developing online tutorial videos to help residents understand sort of the permitting process. We want to continue to build out that library to have videos available for our public to understand the permitting process, to be more prepared when they submit an application. We've had really good success with our satellite office out in Blue River. Decades ago, at one time, land management had a satellite office out in Florence where we could help customers out there so they didn't need to drive in from the coast. We'd like to reopen a satellite office in Florence. We definitely want to work more with our partners in the development community as we develop these new tools. I want to work closely with design professionals as we develop that online portal and that application submittal guide so they can help us understand the kind of obstacles that they're running into as we develop these new tools. And then finally, we've had, again, really good success with Marianne Nolte in her role as the permit navigator for folks upriver. Down the line, I'd like to explore the idea of maybe making that position more of a permanent BUDS person for, to really help solve and problem shoot some of these really challenging building permit processes. I think it's a good model. It's working out well. And we have a number of really challenging, sticky issues that come up that could use, obviously our whole team is dedicated to finding solutions, but having a resource to really just throw at those complex issues will be helpful. Finally, key performance indicators. This is critical. This is an area that we haven't been able to hone in on over the last couple of years, but an area where there's a lot of effort moving into. It has to do with limited, limitations with our current permit tracking software. We don't have really good data to provide key performance indicators around timelines. There's a lot of caveats that we have to discuss we'll try to track timelines. So really, we're working with one of our software vendors right now to establish really clear metrics on how long it takes a permit to move through the system and how long that permit is actually in staff's court as opposed to in the applicant's court. So that's ongoing right now. And these are the key performance indicators, as I'm aware of the most common questions we get from the public about timelines. These are the key areas that I'm focusing in on. And those are, the time and number, the time of days it takes to issue residential and commercial building permits, type 1 and type 2 land use applications, and then customer service wait times, both customers in our lobby and call times for return phone calls. And then finally, I'd like to have a key performance indicator around code enforcement to understand how long cases are active, how many cases can be resolved voluntarily, et cetera. So key performance indicators is a really big initiative that we're moving into right now. So I do apologize. That was really a lot of information. Just quick summary. We understand there are challenges. They exist. Some of these are outside of our control, but a number of these challenges can be influenced. Even though the last 18 months have been unique, some of these challenges predate these disruptions, and we are taking a number of proactive incremental steps to try to address them. We'll continue to move forward. Sorry about that. That's my 30 minutes. And we'll continue to track progress on these key performance indicators over time. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, first, Mr. Miller, let me say you apologized twice for running over before your 30 minutes were even up. So completely unnecessary. And second, compared to other estimates of how much time presentations take, you're right on the money. So don't worry about it. With that, however, are there commissioners with questions or discussion items at this time? Yes, Vice Chair Farr and then Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Kieran. I'm trying to look in your eyes, but it's impossible in a Zoom meeting. So I wish we were face to face for me to say some of the things that I'm going to say. This is a wonderful presentation because you've nailed right on the head some of the things that we absolutely have to do in order to make certain that people don't register the complaints that commissioners come to you with. The kinds of complaints are how you delineated the complaints. I don't need to go into detail on that. But one thing that I've written down is we can do a lot better in informing the public about the permit process. And you added that getting better submittals to begin with is something we can do much better with. I'd like to talk about those two things right away because I'm a student of an ancient management technique. It's called total quality management, but I still think it works. And you identify the things that really cause other things to break down. And once you solve those things, then the other things quit breaking down. And I believe that you've nailed it right there, that a lot of the breakdown occurs when people simply do not know either what to do or where they are in the process. And so if you add those two things together, informing the public about the permit process and getting better submittals, and if you combine that with what you're talking about, a dashboard where people can see where their Domino's pizza is. Now, if people know where their pizza is, they don't mind waiting. It's like when if you ever watch 30 Rock, when Matt Damon gets on the line and says, we're going to be on the runway for another 30 minutes. It doesn't matter how long they're on the runway, just the fact that they said it is what satisfies people. And I believe that you've identified 3 areas here that we really can affect the way people perceive the permitting department without really even changing what you're doing too much. Because I think I would presume that based upon your staffing levels, everybody's doing their very best job. Nobody's deliberately slowing things down. And nobody's saying, this one I'm going to hold off on. That's not happening. But making certain that people know that that's not happening. I think you've identified it. So if, as we move forward, if we can talk about informing the public about the permitting process, if we can talk more about getting better submittals to begin with, so that between step 4 and 5, I think it was, you said is often a lag, and sometimes it's a week to 2 weeks, and sometimes 3 to 4 months, based generally upon what happened further upstream in the permitting, in the submittal process. So to me, that's the key to the future, is how do we get people better informed as to where things are, how to do things right the first time, and then on an ongoing basis where things are and what to expect next. I think that solves a lot of the problems. When I come to you with an issue, Keir, almost invariably, now I'm going to say it, invariably, you've given me the reason. And when I pass the reason along to people, one of two things happens. They either accept it or it's too late for them to accept it. And the too late for them to accept it is that they felt that they've not gotten answers in time. And I think you've offered a prescription for solving that. So looking forward to hearing more what other commissioners say about it. But I think I don't know, Keir, I don't know how many of you guys went into making this this presentation, but it is spot on. And I will say very well done. You've answered my questions almost entirely. Thank you.
And I will remind everyone that Vice Chair Farr has just given us an indication of his age. His most recent TV program was 30 Rock, and his most recent training was Total Quality Management.
I've got 7 Deming books on my shelf, okay?
Are there other commissioners that would like to comment or ask questions at this time? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Buck, you were next in the queue anyway. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. This was a lot of information packed into a half-hour presentation. I've been working in depth with you on pretty much everything on your list throughout as a rural commissioner, and especially in the aftermath of the fire. And a lot has been done, and there's a lot more to do. The things that kind of popped out to me the most, first of all, was communication. What I would like to see in our permitting and building department the most is that we will be known for superior communication. I don't think we're there yet, but to me, that would be the highest and best use of some training time for everybody, is to ensure that communication is clear as day to those people that are calling in or coming in. Because Commissioner Farr is right, the unknown is what irritates people the most and gets them so frustrated with the process, is that they just don't know what the status is or who's waiting on what. And that does get complicated when you have developers, contractors, consultants also navigating the same permit, and they're not all on the same page. But for me, that communication factor is huge. And we see the results of much of the latest work through the permit navigator position, who really exemplifies this, and that communication one-on-one to the public is so critical. I'd love to have a permit navigator just for everybody else on an ongoing basis, while simultaneously having one for the Holiday Farm folks, because if we're going to wait until all Holiday Farm folks have got their permits, and that's going to be a while as they navigate the rebuilding process, and everybody else who is outside of that area could really benefit from that as well. I have a more specific question, and it was mentioned in the actual material attached to the agenda, was ongoing meetings with some small group of developers, including the Home Builders Association, other contractors in the development world. And I wanted to know, A, how that was going, and B, if that is an ongoing, critical partnership with the division, because I can see that there'll be things that pop up all the time, especially when legislation goes through and something changes. I just see the huge benefit of that partnership.
Sure, I could respond to that. 2 things were mentioned in the packet. One, I discussed some of the work we had done specifically with the Home Builders Association shortly after the Holiday Farm fire, had a series of meetings with them regarding, opportunities for assisting residents upriver, and frankly, challenges that they've experienced with the permitting process. So getting some really good feedback from the Home Builders Association. As I mentioned in the packet, more discussions, more sort of global discussions, ongoing discussions with the Home Builders Association is necessary. I think it's a really good resource. I think they have some good insights that they can provide. So that's one. Those aren't ongoing. Those occurred kind of shortly after the fire. Those need to be picked back up again. And then the second piece that I mentioned is, as we move into this development of the citizen platform, this online application submittal process, what we'd like to identify, is a core group of development professionals, not just, Home Builders Association, but a land use attorney and various other individuals, a small group that can kind of be a task force to help us understand, okay, from our perspective, these are the important things. That will be one part of that, but I also want to engage the public, because really a lot of those professionals understand the process already, but they can provide some insights as to what their customers are experiencing. But we also want to have some just residents available as well, and part of that task force that can help us design a better tool for them.
I appreciate that. I do feel like those task force, or however we describe them, are absolutely critical to our success in your department and should be ongoing in nature, because we still get calls and emails of, hey, have you tried this? Maybe this could be changed. And that's really something that I could see happening for the foreseeable future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich, and then Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. And Keir, thank you for the report. And I really appreciate the recognition that this predates the pandemic, because, we recognized a while ago the cyclical nature of permitting and made a conscious decision prior to the pandemic to reach into reserves to levelize the funding of positions in land management for just that reason, that we were always lagging behind the actual revenues with staff as permits swept up. So we've been trying to work on this for quite a while, and I really appreciate the focus on communication with the applicants and trying to keep them in touch with the process, because that kind of, what I hear from the applicant side is, what they hear is, bring me a rock. Oh, that wasn't the right rock. Type back and forth. Their side of the volleyball effect sounds like that to them. They get the completeness review and they get kicked out of being incomplete. Bring in something that they were told would complete it, and then they get told there's another something. In their mind, that's what they kind of see. So that communication is really key to make sure that people understand everything they need to get an application deemed complete. It is really important. And I really like where we're going with staff and where we're going with that communication. What I'd like to focus on is, how can the board help you? And one of the things I see is there are decision points in the building and permitting planning process that the board actually can make policy decisions that take workload away from you or take complexity away from the applicant. One of those places, which I'd like to see come back to the board, is, where do we require geotech reports based on the new Dogami risk maps? That was kind of left up to local jurisdictions to make that decision, but it never rose to the board level to make a policy risk decision. And I bring that up just because I know of one person that was trying to get an 800 square foot addition to an existing house done and was required to get a geotech for an 800 square foot addition. It just seemed to be overkill. And at the time when everyone from the Holiday Farm fire was asking for geotech reports, it really set their project back and cost them a lot of money in increased lumber prices. So it's that, where can the board, help you all with trying to make some decisions at the board level that the board can do to help you streamline your processes and also streamline what the applicants are required to do. So that's just one example that I'm aware of. I may not be aware of a bunch of others, but I'm just, I know the board would like to see the customer service experience of our constituents be a good one, and where we can help you with that, please let us know.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Mr. Miller, I just want to say that was one of the most positive feedback loops from Commissioner Bozovich on land management I've heard for quite some time. So I think that means we're heading in the right direction. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Miller. Really helpful. It was a lot packed into half an hour. And a couple of things I want to say. One, about staffing levels. That's great to see. I also just want to recognize and acknowledge that someone isn't hired into a new position and then performing at the level of someone who's been in that job for a few years by the next week. It takes time. So the staffing up numbers don't tell the full story. It takes a while, and I completely get that and appreciate that. The other thing is, you mentioned a staffing number relative to Deschutes County, but what you didn't mention is Deschutes has only a little over half our population as a county, and similarly with square miles. So not only do they have more folks in their division, but they have fewer people in their county and fewer miles to cover. So it makes the gap even bigger, is what I'm saying. So I appreciate the comparator, but also wanted to point out that. I also very much appreciate the focus on communication and just aligning expectations from step one, which sets up the culture and moving forward in anybody's process. I was really excited to see in the materials with the agenda that an e-build program is potentially in the pipeline. That's something I've heard from some local architects and builders, that the city of Eugene has an e-build software and that we don't, and that's a huge clarifier and time saver all the way around. And that leads me to my specific question, and apologies if you addressed this in your presentation and it flew past me, is there, from your perspective, a difference? Because from professional architects and designers and builders' perspective, there is a difference when it's a professional firm applying versus an individual homeowner, in that what they already bring to the table, what they understand is expected, and yet they get some of the same automated responses about, something's missing. And I've heard some frustration from local builders and architects that there should maybe be a different track or another way for them to communicate and get their work through the system, just because they come to the process with so much more information already, but get some of the same automated kind of responses and so on. Anything you have to offer on that topic? And I will just say, and that speaks to Commissioner Buck's point about the task force or what have you. I've also heard folks really ready and willing and interested in stepping up to participate in just that kind of thinking partnership and group problem solving from the 360 of everyone who interacts with the division. So thanks for putting that on the plan as well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I do recognize that that's an area where obviously we have a lot of very competent professionals out in the community who understand the process more than, the moms and pops that we, in the city, folks tended to work more with contractors. In the rural areas, we have a lot more kind of owner builders. That's just kind of the nature of the work. Some of those owner builders, though, are amazingly efficient, great general managers. Honestly, I've dealt with a number of folks who are a better, more organized manager of their project than some firms that they hire. They have more skin in the game, and they're dedicated. And along with that, I've seen some design firms that don't consistently provide a professional product. They might not have a licensed architect on board. It might just be a designer. They may contract out with an engineer. Sometimes those processes get really muddled, and sometimes our permits that go most sideways involve certain design firms. So I think it's a little of that, and there's definitely a time and a place to have a process for design professionals that they can just bypass all of the basic requirements. But we're still find ourselves kind of working with some of those professionals on some very basic submittal requirements from time to time as well. quick thing, thanks for pointing out sort of the contrast with Deschutes County. You know, I looked at that same information, you know, their population and their size, and I was thinking about throwing that information out there, but I just, for sake of being accurate, they have a very similar size rural population that we do. So they have about 60,000 rural residents, whereas we have about 70,000 rural residents. But there's, and they have a lot of permit activity as well. It's very busy there. But yeah, if we had the resources, I think most planning, building, you know, departments in the county look at Deschutes County as sort of the model. They have a lot of resources, and that's something that'd be great to get there. But, you know, obviously we're not there yet. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Kier, my only criticism of your report is it took 32 minutes. Forgive me. That's I really strongly concur with elements of the remarks of every commissioner in this, which is nice to be able to say. I agree with, for me, I've had the same experience with you in your office that Commissioner Farr has. Invariably, you have responded and given me information on any specific issues that I've been able to convey back to applicants, and thank you for that. Really agree with Commissioner Buck and Trieger on, you know, the public input and maintaining that as sort of a not quality control, but just an input process. And totally agree with Commissioner Bozovich. If there are policy things that we as a board can do to facilitate you moving forward with the goals of the plan that you've shared with us, please don't hesitate. That's our job, and it will make our jobs much easier. Now, my comment is that I don't recall the exact 3 things that you described as areas for improvement, but I do remember one of them is in our control, and that's the communication. And I think any business person will say in any endeavor, you want to try and control as many variables in the process as you can and create, to a degree, some level of certainty so that that will guide your investments. And as it relates to communication, I heard you talk about what I know facetiously referred to as a dominoes model. And I do take exception with Commissioner Farr. I don't care where my pizza is, I'm hungry. But it's good to know where it's at. But whether we're talking Amazon, the local furniture store, Rife's, where we bought a piece of furniture, regardless, Uber Eats, you know, there is software off the shelf that can be modified, I believe. I mean, maybe I'm dangerously and precipitously going into the weeds, that's your domain, but my experience tells me that we can buy off the shelf software and modify it for that end in the event there aren't other planning departments that have already done that. So not only do I think that's a variable we can control, but I think that's a variable that will create, that will eliminate and mitigate a ton of confusion and frustration from the variety of communities, right? Whether it's property owners, contractors, design, build, architects, engineers, whomever, as it relates to the process of any permit. So I can't underscore from my own experience how significant I think that'll be. And I would like your estimation of a time frame, because usually for me, I think in terms of getting a job done, but I don't think in terms of the various government processes necessary to get to the end. So what's an ETA for a robust piece of software that can track every aspect of the process and can communicate clearly to the multiple actors on any permit? What do you think? I believe you're muted.
Thank you. Chair Bernie, I'll just say that really is an incredibly complex question when you say every permit type and every step of the way, because there are a multitude of permits. There's a lot of front end work there are products available off the shelf, but there is so much back end work involved with staff sort of breaking down each permit application type, creating those milestones, putting in the metadata that it turns into meaningful data that the public then sees. So it's going to be a back and forth process. As I mentioned, we have an RFI out right now. The RFP, RFQ process, that can take, depending on what kind of vendors come out of that, that can take several months. And then I envision that we can get, a vendor on board within the next, 3 to 4 months. But then it's that build out process. It's working with them to turn our data and our permit software information, which is very complex, into a product that's worthwhile to the public. So I'm sort of skirting your question. I mean, I can't provide a solid timeline right now. I think it would take a software engineer to get into our data sets, look at it, work with staff who are subject experts on each of these permit types and frame something out. Obviously, my goal is we get it up and running as quickly as possible, but it will take time. I will say that we've developed some initial tools that are a bit more basic that kind of do the same thing that were built in-house, and those are on the McKenzie Rebuild site, where it can kind of help folks understand, but it's very rudimentary. What I want to provide is a much more granular level of detail for folks to understand exactly what's missing in their permit, where they're at in the step, and that will take time.
So the answer to the question, forgive me, because I'm entirely supportive of where you're taking the department, but the answer to the question is it'll take time.
As soon as possible, and I don't know what I don't know yet, honestly, about digging into the software and trying to launch this new tool, and that's
Okay.
about as honest a response as I can provide.
Okay. As part of a conversation, not as a criticism, in my past incarnation, we worked with Salesforce and modified that to actually even more complex with more variables. So I think there might even be professionals out there that could guide. And I think as soon as you are in a position where you can give us, a range of ETAs for when this will be in place, is the first time this will be tangible to me, so that I can continue to support this with all enthusiasm, because obviously this is the right direction to take the department. It's the right direction for the public, and it's a process that you have, from my read, the total support of the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's absolutely within the game plan. As soon as we scope this project, we have a better outline and project work plan. We'll be checking in with the board on that.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners with any comments or questions before we move from this item? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Ever so brief, Chair Bernie, and to you and Keir both. Keir, you're looking for a very granular and detailed response to folks as to where they are in the permitting process. I order stuff from Amazon. I hate Amazon because it's not local. I'd rather buy from Jerry's, or I'd rather buy from Bimart.
Right.
But on Amazon, I'm looking at my the orders that I placed last week. I ordered some pen parts, some CA glue, and a Matchbox trash truck. And it tells me when I ordered them, it tells me when they were shipped, and tells me when they're due to arrive. And ordered the same day, but with a different outcome. So something that's not quite so granular can have tremendous result in terms of customers knowing where things are. Just a 5-point, where is it in the process? And then the granular could come later, way later, as far as I'm concerned. And that's to both you, Chair Bernie, and to you, Keir. If we can get something quicker, just to give us a sense of progress, that would be something. I'm not saying you go to Amazon and buy their software, but something not unlike that would solve a great deal of mystery in people's minds. Thanks. That's all, Chair Bernie.
Oh no, thank you for eloquently, succinctly articulating what I was trying to. Thank you very much. Any other commissioners before we move on? Great report, Mr. Miller. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now, hey, that's pretty impressive. It's 2:31. We are now on item 12A, 12, County Administration A, discussion and overview of existing property evaluation for emergency and permanent shelter use. And I know we have Greg Rickoff, Director of Operations, Sean Waite, Facilities Manager, and Sarai Johnson, Joint Shelter and Housing Strategist, with us today. Greg, I presume you want to lead this off?
Chair Bernie, commissioners, thank you. Yes, I will. We three are members of a larger team, City of Eugene and City of Springfield, Lane Transit District, Chamber of Commerce, as well as county employees. The county employees involved in the effort to review properties include Dan Hurley, Lance Inglet, Steve Manila, and Jeff Kincaid. This interdisciplinary team has been scouring the local area for property, be it open lots or built structures, be they public or private, to identify sites that can be turned into shelter or permanent housing. On February 1st, you asked staff to prepare and return to you an overview of existing properties to be evaluated for emergency and permanent housing. At that time, you may remember the 11th Beltline encampment was in full swing. There was tremendous pressure to utilize the fairgrounds as a sheltering site at the same moment that the county was planning to utilize the fairgrounds as the central site for the mass vaccination. We have gathered this interdisciplinary team and have looked at over 500 properties. We have not brought them back to you for consideration. We have done this in-house with the agencies. One of the challenges, as we understand it, is once we bring properties and name them to you, there tends to be bullseyes both on the property and on you all, as be that good or be that bad. And it harms our ability to have an assessment and perhaps, if necessary, negotiate for that property. So what we have for you today is an overview of the process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean and Sarai.
Yes, Sarai, go ahead.
Thank you, Greg, Chair, and Commissioners. Just to add a little bit of additional context to that 11th and Beltline piece of information that Greg just shared, this was one of the main reasons why we really took this team to the next level. So in fact, we really started very early in my tenure, which was right as the demobilization of the emergency respite shelters at the fairgrounds and the memorial building were closing down to see if we could find alternative locations. And that initial effort took a few months, and I think we turned up almost nothing. But luckily, we were able to pull this team together and really do a lot deeper digging in both in public inventories of land as well as properties for lease or purchase, as Greg mentioned. And that work has continued in depth with the City of Eugene in particular, and we've in that process and through other means, the city has identified a number of different sites for safe sleep sites to go, including the possibly a county property or two in that mix. So that will kind of emerge as we continue working on developing those safe sleep sites. And as the city stands them up, we'll have continuing conversations about where these locations can be. And now I think I'll pass it to you, Sean, for the nitty-gritty exciting details of what we've come up with.
Right, the technical information. Thank you, Sarai, Chair and Commissioners. Back in April, and some of this is going to be a little redundant from what Greg and Sarai said, but it'll be in a little bit more detail of the technical process. But back in April, we began the partnership with the City of Eugene to look at safe sleep sites that could accommodate the 60 vehicles or up to 400 tents. This has been a very collaborative effort with the city at all levels in our organization. Like Greg said, he's been involved, Sarai's been involved, Steve Manila from HHS has been involved, Jeff Kincaid, a senior management analyst in CAO, has also done a significant amount of research in support of this project. And then Lance Inglet in Public Works has been a great asset as far as helping us with the road funds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So I'm hoping you can see the map. There are some spots identified on there. It doesn't capture everything that we've looked at. because we have looked at over 500 sites that could potentially serve for a safe sleep site. And so if we showed all 500, this would just be a big blob of blue. So we have just kind of identified certain areas within Lane County that we have looked at multiple properties in that area. We've also looked at about 50 private properties. As we went through the assessment of each site, we looked at lot size to make sure that, you know, would it be big enough to accommodate the 60 vehicles or 40 tents, the zoning type, which we have a little more leeway on zoning given the legislation that passed this last regular session. And then also, is it close to a transit location? Is it close to any bus, or can they get a cab? That kind of stuff. Also price. So in some of the private properties, they were asking for lease payments, or they would be willing to sell it to us for a pretty substantial amount. So all those conversations were happening. We were looking at current use, and then also surrounding areas. So NIMBY was a conversation, kind of like what Greg was talking about, and then availability. And then another thing that was a primary conversation with us was the access to utilities. So we wanted to make sure that it would be easy to get electricity out there, and then also some sort of water source, whether we're bringing in some sort of porta pots or hand washing stations, and the ability to provide those services. In most cases, the most common disqualifying factors or that the lot sizes were too small, or they were too narrow, or they were on a steep hill, and that there was no access to either transit or utilities. But we have taken some additional steps when evaluating our county properties that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So this is something that we haven't done before, and we just started doing that in the last few months. So first, we are looking at identifying road fund properties that we no longer need, and could we repurpose them to help support these safe sites, safe camping sites. Over the past few months, we have looked at several road fund properties, and Lance Inglett's been a real significant partner in all of this, helping have conversations with ODOT about what could be used for these purposes. And, you know, this actually led to identifying the Northwest Expressway property. And so we were able to work with the city on that location. Second, we have implemented a new process with our property management section. In September of every year, Assessment and Taxation gives our property management section a list of properties that are foreclosed on, and they're county properties. And so normally what happens is that we take these properties, we work with the property owner. If they're not interested in paying the back taxes and they are willing to turn the property over to the county, we were automatically just putting that property up for auction. So in the beginning of this year, any properties in which the owner had decided they were not interested in buying the property back and it was deeded to the county, then we would use that property as part of the consideration for these safe sites. Unfortunately, most of the properties that we get are residential, so those aren't going to meet the requirements that we need for our safe sites. But time to time, we do get some commercial properties that are foreclosed on. For example, last year, we did look at a Kelso Street property that was an old wrecking yard that had been cleaned up. DEQ had passed all the inspections and certified that the land was clean, but it was too far from some transit, and utilities would have been difficult to get out there. So we are, you know, continuing to partner with the city We're continuing to identify limited county property inventory that we have, so that we're hoping that we can create more sites in partnership with the county.
And just to conclude, this is an ongoing effort. The county views itself really as a facilitator in this role, given the lack of real estate we have. We have included in this a continued work with partners throughout the county, including ensuring that the pallet shelters that were distributed to Florence, Veneta, Oak Ridge, and Cottage Grove stay in those communities to help community members from those communities stay local. In this effort, it was greatly aided by Tiffany Edwards at Lane Transit District, looking at property owned by the Transit District. Neil Ladati and Aaron Fifield in Springfield focused on Springfield owned and managed properties. Christy Hammett, Matt Rodriguez, Brooke Freed, and Ed Russo was the City of Eugene team looking at city properties or properties within the City of Eugene metropolitan area. And then Brittany Quick Warner and several realtors who we don't necessarily want to name at this time helped us identify property as they thought it was coming available and might be good for this use. So it really has been a collaborative effort. Our focus remains on permanent supportive housing and really addressing the housing issue. And we are working very hard to be complete partners for the municipalities that are struggling to address this issue. The only last piece would be, we have Alex Kyler working very closely with the lobbyists of Eugene and Springfield to bring in resources to do both land purchasing and shelter structures in their local communities. With that, we'll wrap it up, and we're open for questions. Or turn it back to you, Chair Bernie.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Rickoff. Are there any questions or comments by commissioners? See, I was trying to do 3 C's in a row, the way Ms. Waite did big blob of blue. So I'm questions or comments, commissioners. Any commissioners at all? Yes, Commissioner Buck, who was going to break up this log jam yet again. Commissioner.
I appreciate the info. The map is kind of really general for me, so I don't know what we can do to help you along other than let you do your jobs and narrow them down even further to sites that are actually useful and helpful for the community. I know you've been at this for some time. It's not an easy task, but I am anxious to get to some that are actually viable for a variety of different kinds of housing types. I do know we are very aggressive in trying to find those permanent supportive housing dollars, but there is a wide variety of housing needs out there, and I guess I need to hear more about who's doing what. We kind of have this chicken and egg game with the cities and the county as to who's working exactly on what particular issue, and I'm not sure we've resolved that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does anyone want to respond to that from staff?
I'm happy to jump in there. Chair Bernie, Commissioner Buck, this is a very general presentation, and we haven't started to name specific properties. We don't have any properties that are within our purview to control. At this point, most of the property selection, particularly for the sheltering space, has gone through the City of Eugene, and those were the sites mentioned. I would venture to say we probably hit a little bit of our success a few weeks back when we worked with Homes for Good and sponsors for using the Four Corners real estate property that was part of this effort, and with their advancing 50 to possibly 61 units of permanent supportive housing. That's the type of focus that we will continue to bring to you as those real estate opportunities show themselves. But we have not had any property under our control or that we would be purchasing or leasing that has risen to the occasion at this point. I know Sarai might have more to say on that.
I was actually going to say about the same thing as you, that the county property typically will partner with Homes for Good or for other developers to create the affordable housing.
Thank you very much. I saw that Vice Chair Farr had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, and Sarai and Greg, thanks very much. You know, I viewed this report today as a snapshot of the work in progress, and the work's, it didn't start just this week. The work's been going on for a long time, but I am seeing more progress toward ultimately getting some innovative new properties in line for development. As Commissioner Buck said, and something that I always say, and you mentioned it yourself, Greg, that permanent supportive housing is the gold ring. That is what we're looking for many of the people who are suffering from homelessness due to behavioral health issues in particular. But this is a huge not first step, but a huge ongoing step. And what it helps me to do is that when I answer the question that is asked all the time, it's particularly asked this time of the year, why haven't you done anything about it? You know, and sometimes that question is regarding winter strategies or hazard response, hazard weather response. And the answer is always, we have done something about it, but the situation is dynamic. Every year it's different. Every year we have more people who are needing a different kind of help, and it makes it so that our job is not linear. And the job, Sean and Greg, that you have just presented, and Sarai, that you're working on with every waking moment, is an illustration of that we're continually trying to respond to the many new types of needs that are presenting themselves. On this coming Monday, we'll have a Human Services Commission meeting, and a part of that meeting we'll be talking specifically about that, about the changing dynamics of the services that are needed and the properties that are needed. This is a snapshot. This helps me to give reports that let people know that the county, in cooperation with the cities, is doing something. And we are continually doing it, and we're looking down the road more than ever to find permanent solutions. So no direct questions regarding this, other than I'd love, and I'm trying to figure out where these points are on the map. The one that's a Green Hill Road and Route F is a beautiful spot. And I'm wondering if that's Roscoe Devine's property or if that's the place across the street, or, you know, so I'll have this speculation, but I won't ask the questions out loud. So, you know, it's once again, a wonderful snapshot of work in progress. And thank you to all three of you for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of you for the presentation. I think a sort of similar but different way of putting what Commissioner Farr just said is when people say, what are you doing? If we say, well, we don't have land, right? Because I hear that, at least from people. Surely there must be all kinds of places the county could put X, whatever that is, a shelter, a temporary site for Conestoga huts, et cetera. And so this shows, to be able to say, no, we don't, and how we know that is, we took an inventory, here's what we found, here's what we do have, here's why it is or isn't suitable for such a use, is really helpful. I'm curious too, if this process might not also yield us an understanding of what's out there and available for other uses. I mean, specifically, the agenda item is property evaluation for emergency and permanent shelter use. But we've been talking about, right, citing permanent supportive housing or other services that we know that we are working towards developing and need a home for, like expanded, you know, crisis behavioral health response services or what have you. So I'm wondering also if this might not just have been a useful, I don't want to call it an exercise, a useful practice and tool just to understand what all the inventory of properties are and what they may or may not be useful for county services writ large, having started from the place of emergency shelter or temporary shelter use. I don't know if that's come to the surface at all. And I think for us to know that and to what extent would require, as both commissioners who spoke before me said, a little more detail of exactly what these pins on the map represent and a little more description about them in terms of what they're, you know, are they bare dirt? Is there a structure on it now? acreage and so on. So it seems like I'm guessing this was a pretty useful process to go through and may yield us even more than what we initially were asking for.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner Bozovich, do you have any comment? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Rickoff.
If I may, Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, you are spot on. Well, this inventory is staying with us, and we're using it to assess for things like the Mental Health Crisis Center. So, it is an inventory that we are keeping. As we look at other housing options, as we look at opportunities to expand. So it's and also in some cases, of course, it's clearing that these properties will not work. So it has been a valuable exercise. I know one of the things with Sean's re-envisioning how we work with property and how her property manager is availing herself of this effort, it gives us that stock that we can examine. The one piece I did not answer, Commissioner Buck, to your question, the role clarity is a critical issue, and I don't think we are where we need to be yet in terms of our partnerships with the cities, with the chambers of commerce. And I do think some of the work that's going on with Build for Zero, I think some of the things you're going to be hearing through the Poverty and Homelessness Board is a real push for greater role clarity and understanding, so that we can be more efficient and effective as we proceed to get people housed.
Rather than ask anyone, is there any other commissioner that would like to make a statement or ask a question at this time? Okay. Well, here are some comments. Gosh, I hate to be critical. First, it was 2 years ago or 3 that this was actually initially asked for, an inventory of properties that perhaps could be used as it related to different uses, actually, much as Commissioner Trieger said, writ large. I'm sorry, Commissioner Farr?
It was 8 years ago that I first asked for it. So.
Dang, he upstaged me again. Okay, I only asked for it 3 years ago, but Vice Chair Farr is the winner. So in terms, so you can understand, well, you all and your staffs are in the field, doing the real work. It still seems to take a long time. Having said that, I also appreciate that my guess is if we had one site for every person that Mr. Rickoff identified as collaborating in this effort, we'd be way ahead right now than we are at this time. I want to compliment you on, yes, when we picked up 7 corners, 11 corners, for the site at 4 Corners, a site that I've had the opportunity with Ms. Waite to walk through, to view, to talk to the contractors. Interestingly, talk to the solar contractor that's going to be putting solar up there recently. That's really cool. I mean, that's a great way to maximize a site that this wasn't purchased in the first place for. So that's really cool. Question: doesn't the county own a significant number of acres near Jerry's on West 11th?
So Chair Bernie, commissioners, I would have to I would have to look at our inventory list. There was several acres out in that area that we did look at. There were some that was designated as a wetland area. I'll have to go back and double check why we weren't selecting that property for a site.
But I don't even know. I just heard. Does the county own some of that property already?
We do. Mm-hmm.
You talking about the Owen Loop area?
Yeah, the Owen Loop area, we own about 4.4 acres out there.
And it is pretty significant wetlands.
Yes, but
okay.
we are currently considering that area. One of the complications with that area is it is part of an owners association group, and so we are in talks with them about what that would look like.
Okay. And like Vice Chair Farr, I happen to know someone of a different name that owns a significant amount of property. Some of it is wetlands, but certainly not all of it, right at the corner of Green Hill and West 11th. And give me a holler. I think they'd be interested in the right structure of a sale. Next comment, I'm a big fan of county owning or acquiring assets as opposed to leasing and renting, as you guys have so ably, done with what will be the navigation center and with what will be, I guess, Bridges over Broadway, but we knew as formerly known as the artist known as Print, formerly known as the Red Line. So I know we're aggressively moving in that direction. Another point, has the county ever explored a program to promote, just as many nonprofits do, people that own industrial property that could be converted for shelter, that meet requirements, to, in their wills, endow that property for a specific purpose to the county or to another entity that's a partner with the county? No one need respond. I'm just throwing that out there. And I'm going to throw out there another point, and that is, what if the county had a joint venture with a private developer, and in fact, when property becomes county owned due to lack of taxes, especially with the new state law that allows multiple units on residential lots, what if the county and its partner looked at developing those into as many units as would be appropriate as part of its overall strategy? Anyway, I don't expect any comments. I appreciate the work that you're sharing with us. And this is more than a big blue blob. Sorry, Sean, I had to do that. But more power to you. I hope that these thoughts that I've shared get some traction, because it's such a big topic and it permeates so much of everything going on. But thank you very much. This is really good stuff. Any other commissioners? Any other questions or comments on this item? Mr. Rickoff, Ms. Waite, Ms. Johnson, thank you all very much for your commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now the moment we've all been waiting for. No, I'm just kidding. We are now, if you look, we are now on items, let's call it 12B, C, and D of our agenda. This is the time set for a first reading, a staff report, and scheduling a second reading and public hearing, at which time deliberations will occur for ordinances 21-11, 21-12, and 21-13. Ordinance 21-11 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map J. Ordinance 21-12. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I don't want you to read all of these. These items are on a 3:30 time certain, so we will need to move to the other items before these start.
Thank you, Diana. It's a good thing I don't mind looking bad. Thank you for correcting me. Okay.
Sorry about that. No. Sorry.
I apologize. It is 3:30 time certain, and I was okay. Given that, I suppose, Mr. Mokrahysky, if you're there, then we would be on 12E, which is county administration announcements. Are there, if that is correct, I think it is, are there any announcements?
Sure, we can do that, Chair. Just a brief announcement. I shared this with you via email last week, but I ran out of time to share with you an update I had planned last week to share with you. So this is regarding the email I sent in the memo from our emergency manager regarding all hazards sheltering and all hazards sheltering task force. And our Patience Winningham, our emergency manager, met again last night with this group of folks. As the board knows, and Commissioner Farr has requested from the Poverty and Homelessness Board that Lane County look at establishing an all hazards task force for sheltering individuals in inclement weather or emergencies. So on October 29th, representatives from COAD, Black Thistle, Eugene, Springfield, and the state of Oregon and Lane County met to determine the course of action to be taken to meet this request of the interagency team. So the priorities that were established by this group were to convene a hazardous weather task force, to organize a whole community response, and to provide multi-jurisdictional resources to support incident activations, including community organizations, active in disaster, community-based organizations, local governments, and state partners. So again, this group met yesterday, and the message that I received from patients today is that that we're continuing to make progress in the right direction. We're looking at a date, an opportunity to update the board specifically in December or January around the formation of the task force. I guess a couple of things I'll share is that the group is working to determine and establish thresholds and justifications for standing up inclement weather shelters and or providing resources and support in the field below 32 degrees and above 100 degrees, to determine and establish a tiered approach for levels of activation by county, city, and community partners, to determine, identify representatives from the community be included in the advanced planning phase and the response phase of the project, and then to align and integrate all stakeholders into emergency support function 6, which is the mass care for advanced planning purposes, and to include representatives throughout all of Lane County. So that's just a brief update. Again, you have this, but I wanted to provide that publicly for you. And we should have another update with recommendations for the composition of a task force here within the next few weeks. That's all I have, Chair, unless you have any questions for me.
I have none. Do any commissioners have any? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Since we have a minute, I just want to be sure I understand you. It sounds like, and of course, as the task force develops, it'll come clearer, but this is not only about what infrastructure we might stand up, but what communication structure we might stand up across different municipalities. Because I know, as we experienced, particularly with the extreme heat event this summer, it was less about, is it up to Lane County to stand up cooling centers and respond to people who are housed, but dangerously so, in extreme heat across the county geographically, but how are we communicating with, so we can let the public know where to go in their own communities. So is that accurate?
Yes, and I'd say that's where we have found probably the most significant gap is an understanding among elected officials, who oftentimes are the first line of communication for residents and advocates and service providers, and then staff and others in the field that are organizing and coordinating. There's just a big gap in communication and understanding about what's happening, and then these emergencies pop up, and there's a lot of sort of spinning that happens around that. And so absolutely, yes, that is a significant part of what we're trying to close that gap, create common understanding and knowledge around what assets, what tools, who's in charge, what's going to be happening in those various inclement weather situations.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for the clarification. Are there any other commissioners that have any questions from Mr. Mokrahysky at this time? Yes, Vice Chair Farr. Vice Chair, you're muted.
Oops, I guess I wasn't muted the whole time. Just very, very briefly, Mr. Mokrahysky, thanks for the work that you're doing on it. I'm pretty confident that it's moving in the right direction, and there'll be a short report presented to the Human Services Commission on Monday. I believe that Patience is going to be invited to sit on a panel at that meeting on Monday. So once again, it's of high interest to the Poverty and Homelessness Board and anybody associated with the board. And good work in moving it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, with your approval, we'll move into 13A and B. My guess is we may get through that a bit early. We might take a 5 or 10 minute break. We'll just kind of see where we are there. So if that's all right, 13A, Commissioner business announcements. Are there any announcements from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a heads up to my colleagues. I've been approached by staff. As you all know, we've put an RFP out to find a consultant to work with on a long range plan for the Lane Event Center and fairgrounds. And given the very tight turnaround and the fact that I am your liaison to the Fair Board and the fairground sits within my district, staff reached out to ask if I might be the commissioner representative on reviewing those applications and participating in that process with whatever consultant is selected. So I wanted to give the heads up and offer that out to my colleagues to let them know that I've been invited to participate, and I'm very much excited to do so. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Commissioner. Thank you. Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
This shouldn't be brand new news, but we did have a very huge bipartisan infrastructure package just pass Congress.
You're kidding.
And we did. It sounds like it will be signed into law on Monday. It was part of our NACO Transportation Steering Committee meeting at lunch today. It's big news for them, and they're rolling out information from their website as to all the impacts. There's so much involved, and there's lots of additional work we need to see from the government side of things as to details in the infrastructure package, but there's lots for counties to be pleased about, and money that hopefully we here locally will also be able to take advantage of, including rural internet broadband, which I'm super excited about. So in the next week, we'll probably be hearing more, and then in the coming months, seeing how it's rolling out for counties across the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. It'll be interesting soon to see its impacts for Oregon and by implication for Lane County. Any other announcements? Item 30. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bozovich.
Just quickly, I want to remind folks we had a celebration down in Lorraine yesterday of the pretty much the completion of the Stony Point improvements to Territorial Highway. And I got to participate in that celebration. The community there is really excited. This was part of House Bill 2017 that Commissioner Lycan, helped get through with the help of a bunch of other legislators, but in particularly Senator Prozansky and Representative Paul Hovey helped get the jurisdictional transfer of Territorial Highway built into that, along with the funding that came with that transfer that got this project underway. And for anyone that's ever been to King Estates or Ailsong, they know how bad that road was in that section, and the change is amazing. Our staff and the contractor did an amazing job. It was a great little celebration, and kind of made a small part of Lane County realize that they're not forgotten by the county.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. May I ask how many people were in attendance?
There were actually probably about 40 people there. It was one of the biggest groups I've been in since COVID.
Very good. Are there any other commissioners with any other announcements? We are then on item 13B, future board assignment requests. Do any commissioners have future board assignment requests? Seeing none, Mr. Mokrahajski, does it make sense to you to hold off on a review of assignments until after we are at the end of our meeting?
Yes, and I'll just say I don't have any so far. So that's what I've heard so far. So we'll see what comes out of the items 12, B, C, and D.
Well, per our conversations, we'll be glad to generate some to give you more to do.
Thank you so much.
Commissioners, it's 3:11. We have a 3:30 time certain. Diane, Ms. Jones, is it okay to keep this open and let us pause and turn off our cameras and rejoin after 3:25?
Absolutely, that would be perfect.
Commissioners, with your permission? Okay, let's rejoin sometime before 3:30. Thank you very much. See you in a few minutes. on items 12B, C, and D of our agenda. This is the time set for a first reading and scheduling a second reading and public hearing, at which time there will be deliberations for ordinances 21-11, 21-12, and 21-13 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map J, excuse me, that was 21-11, 21-12, in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map Q, and 21-13, in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map C. Hearing a staff report and a report from the chair and vice chair of the Independent Redistricting Committee, and then setting a second reading and public hearing for all three ordinances. And Ms. Williams, I know you are here with Morgan Monroe, the Independent Redistricting Committee chair, and Natalie Dibens, who I'm very much looking forward to seeing, since she was my appointment to the committee, and I understand she's been a real asset and vice chair, and in that these were blind appointments. We've never seen or met one another before. There you are. It's very nice to meet you now. So, Ms. Williams, I believe, Natalie, there might be a little static. Yeah, Ms. Williams, if you would proceed with the report, we are all ears.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Judy Williams here, Strategy and Integration Manager for Lane County. And I have been a liaison to this redistricting committee. I also have Morgan Monroe here with us, who you'll hear from in a moment. She's been the chair of the Independent Redistricting Committee. And Nat Dibens, the vice chair of the committee as well. We also have on the phone and available if questions come up, we have Steve Dingle, County Counsel, and Cheryl Betchart, our clerk as well, if there's questions. So I will just kick us off. Make sure I push the right button. Okay. So we have a roughly 20-25-minute presentation for you. Just really trying to cover the basics of redistricting, and some of this may seem a little bit basic or repetitive of when we've come back to you on the board, but just wanted to offer, as we're doing an ordinance process, it may not be as common sense to everybody out there. There's a public hearing in the near future on this, and just wanted to make sure that anybody and everybody could just pop in, hear a summary, and have a basic understanding of the processes that we've been through to get to this point. And then we'll dive in. You'll hear from both Morgan and Nat in more detail about the actual summary of the report to you, as well as some the maps and next steps. So just again, to kind of kick this off on again, the basics of what is redistricting? And I think it's just helpful to kind of break it down into, some people may be familiar with the term, others may not, but it's really just kind of looking at what is the district to begin with. And that could be any form of really a territorial division. So, wards, if you're in the city of Eugene, for instance, cities, counties, schools, libraries, there's many types of districts out there. And when we're looking at redistricting, it's really evaluating and drawing those boundaries from which any public official is elected, and really looking at the population. Are there uneven areas? How do we shift the population so that there's more of that equal representation available? I'm going to talk briefly, just kind of the why are we looking at this redistricting effort. And it's really that high level of both federal and state requirements, and not as applicable to our process, but definitely in our U.S. Constitution, every 10 years there's a census that's required. and really states, that requires that the state and legislative districts be substantially equal. We'll kind of hear that throughout the process. At the state level, we have the Oregon Constitution that really delves in with the legislative assembly that's responsible for drawing those legislative and congressional maps. And here a little bit that pertains to Lane County a little bit closer is really looking at the state requirements as it relates to the Secretary of State. There's official directives based on ORS that really applies to both our county clerk and local government that helps to spell out, when we're looking at fixing boundaries based on population, we shall consider the following. So each district or precinct, as nearly as practicable shall be contiguous, touching or having those common boundaries, utilize existing geographic and political boundaries, not divide communities of interest, be connected by transportation links, and for districts be of equal population. In addition, the state directive that also comes out, in addition, spells out, shall not be drawn for the purpose of favoring any political party, incumbent, elected official, or other person, and shall not be drawn for the purpose of diluting any voting strength of a language or ethnic minority group. As we get in a little bit closer to Lane County, our charter, our home rule charter, addresses redistricting efforts as well. And so I won't read each word verbatim, but essentially, section 10, 3, D and E really addresses why we're doing this. It spells out boundaries of 5 districts shall be drawn, not to deny any person equal protection of the law. Should be done every 10 years, not less than every 10 years. No boundary creation, position, designation, or boundary change shall disqualify a commissioner from completing the term of office to which that commissioner was elected. And then also spelling out that by ordinance, the boundaries are going to be addressed. And so that's why we're here to you today to present these in an ordinance form. We've talked about redistricting a few times at the board level. And I think what's helpful to me is kind of visually thinking about what is the process that we've moved through this. And so laying out the 5 phases essentially as to how Lane County has done our redistricting effort. And it really starts with that preparation and preparing what a process might look like. Phase 2 is the formation of that independent redistricting committee and how we prepare best to use the data that is in front of us. Phase 3 is, really getting in and doing that redistricting work, creating the maps, reviewing the maps, having that process. Phase 4 is where we're at today, and turning it over to you as the commissioners as you have that role to create an ordinance. And then, sorry about that, our 5th phase is really that finalization process with Lane County elections. And so I'll go through each of these briefly and hit the highlights of what we've accomplished and what are kind of those next steps. And then I'll turn it over to Morgan and Nat. So briefly in phase 1, this began in 2019 and thinking about what process might we want to take on. The board was very active in terms of, trying to brainstorm, get the framework set for how do we want to reach out? How do we want to gather feedback? And so that feedback happened really in 2020, towards the end of 2020, where we really got great input and feedback from the community as to, this independent redistricting effort we think is going to be the way to go. And so this is, again, that preparation phase. Just this last June is where we actually adopted 2 ordinances. One, a placeholder so that we can abide by the charter deadlines, knowing that we're kind of in a crunch with the pandemic and census information. So that first ordinance addressed a placeholder interview, so we're not so that we are in compliance with our charter. The second ordinance was truly that creation of this independent redistricting committee and bylaws, draft bylaws. before I get into phase 2, which is really the heart of the Independent Redistricting Committee, I just wanted to refresh people's minds on what did we ask of this committee. So the duties of the Redistricting Committee were really to prepare 2 to 4 plans in ordinance form for adoption by the commissioners. The duties were to propose that the proposed plans should comply with relevant laws, and that they should be ranked by the committee. So not only selecting those maps, the 2 to 4, but ranking them in order of preferences and addressing the strengths and weaknesses of each. So in phase 2 is again that formation of the committee. We also brought in additional staff at that time. I stepped into that role. We received 50 timely applications for the process. In that ordinance work early on, we really spelled out, what should that process look like? What should the selection process look like? What are the application materials? Can we have that blind process? And so you'll see that throughout. You're really trying to capture getting the information, selecting a really diverse committee, and addressing that composition of the committee to have that diverse committee to move forward. So each of the commissioners did pick one regular member, and then those 5, a total of 5, were picked at a blind process. And then those 5 met about 4 times, narrowed down, how do they best want to move forward, selected the next 10 members and 3 alternate members. So an 18-member committee started in September, just seems like a few weeks ago, but really hit the ground running and addressed, approving our bylaws, approving how does the committee, create a schedule that works for that many people in the future, knowing that timelines are what they are. We reviewed software vendors with the committee, and the committee chose the software vendor to use for the redistricting, and we conducted training. So an example of what some of those are on your slide, but just basic, redistricting terms. What are the timelines? What are the things that we're really trying to touch on? And just to note, all of the meetings are on our website. They're recorded. We have minutes on there. Really trying to be transparent and help people follow along the process as we go, and making sure that we complied with public meetings law in that aspect. Phase 3 was, again, kind of really getting in there now that we have the census data. The state had done their process. We moved forward, the committee moved forward, and in total met about 14 times. Oftentimes 2 evening meetings a week. The committee was, very committed, and I would say in working closely with them, it was, I'm really proud of the effort and the amount of time that people put in, not only to the meetings themselves, but also a lot of additional time to create maps, review maps in between these meetings. The committee also voted to send 3 maps. So while we had the 2 to 4 range, they voted to send 3 early on in the process. They also agreed that a 1% population variance between those districts was acceptable. And then we really delved into reviewing maps. So the committee created 19 maps in total that were actually submitted for review in committees, had public comment on them. We addressed a number of factors that came up and really ended up, we'll go into a little bit more details shortly, but submitting map J, map Q, and map C in that order to the commissioners. There was a completed report that was written and the committee approved, and that is attachment A in the board packet, all of the material of which is on the board website. So quite a few attachments in there, but attachment A is that written report. And then we did finalize our meeting with a discussion on process improvements. And so that is going to be coming back to you at a later date to give you some feedback as to process improvements and what worked great, what might be suggested for changes. 2 more slides and then I'll hand it over. So phase 4, this is your roles as the commissioners. And so, you know, presenting these options to you in ordinance form, and as our ordinance restrictions are laid out, it's in the form of a first reading today, setting a second reading and a public hearing for all 3 of those maps, conducting a second reading and public hearing, and then ultimately your role is approving an ordinance or redistricting plan. And then that final phase, after your role with the ordinance, it really is that finalization process with elections, and a short turnaround time there is, you know, working, and throughout the process, our county clerk and LCOG have been working with cities and districts already. And so really trying to tie up, you know, once the county is done with our portion, they can really look at their boundaries and do some of the additional steps for completing their boundary work as well. And then the deadline we have here is January 31st is kind of that absolute deadline where the county clerk has to complete precinct boundary changes. And really as much time as possible is really needed so that they can implement all of those changes, which typically takes about a month to get everything ready to meet that January 31st deadline. And as most of you know, there's 3 challenges with the state redistricting process. So we are actively monitoring those timelines. When we get to the November 30th second reading, we will have heard the status of at least 1, if not 2 of those challenges and know kind of where we're at. So we'll be monitoring that and updating the board and the public accordingly. So we're really, while we know there's challenges out there, we can't stop our process, and we just have to assume that things are going to be moving forward, and we'll do our best. And if there are changes to the state's process that may impact something that our committee may need to adjust, the county clerk we're all working closely to see what we may need to, maybe that's minor modifications to meet those requirements. So that's the 5 phases overall and kind of the progress that we've seen to date. With that, I will now turn it over to Morgan Monroe, who's been an amazing chair to this committee. And then Nat will also chime in as well. So after that, we'll do a summary and turn it over for questions. So I will turn it over to Morgan.
Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to get to work on behalf of so many of our neighbors in this work. Our committee, as Judy listed, met many times for many long hours with lots of work between as we tried to figure out this interesting challenge that you handed to us that we were excited to take on together. And that challenge, to remind you, is what Judy was saying, is to prepare these plans. We have 3 plans to present tonight. We evaluated and asked ourselves whether we felt they did comply with the relevant law, and the committee voted and agreed that they did. And then we also were asked to present the maps in preference order. And so they are map J, map Q, and then map C. All right, Judy's going to move to the next slide. All right, so as we met, it's COVID, and we met on Zoom. And so with our 18-member committee and all the staff, spent a lot of time together on the internet these last 2 months. And we were able to really bring up lots of questions along the way, get to know each other a little bit, work really in depth with staff and with legal counsel. We had so many discussions and debates and came to a lot of different decisions along the way. And we've got a long list of feedback that Nat and I are putting together so that the folks in 10 years have information so that they can, have an even better time of it and be more effective for our community. Some of the things that really mattered in this process were transparency. And so that's why we did it in public on Zoom. For many of our committee members, this was the first time they've ever used public meeting laws. I know this was my first time ever doing that. And so learning how to have discussions in public was an interesting piece of this. We also really looked at those pieces with conflicts of interest. And so all of the committee members filled out the statement of economic impact. And we also did conflict of interest declarations as part of our committee work. This gave us the opportunity because a question came up. So we reached out to OGEC and they helped us all learn the difference between an actual conflict of interest and a potential conflict of interest, according to ORS 244. And I learned more about that than I'd realized there was to learn. And so that was a piece of the work that we did. We also spent a lot of time looking at the district descriptions from the charter, neighborhoods, streets, rivers. What does it mean to be a community of interest? You name it, we talked about it. And so that was some of the overview of how we spent the last 2.5 months together putting this together for you. All right, Judy, ready for the next slide? So here's our first map, and it's map J. In the report that you have, there's a much more detailed report with strengths and weaknesses, with maps that you can see. So I would encourage the commissioners and also anyone joining in from the public to look at the report itself in addition to the slides. We list the strengths for J and we list the weaknesses for J. As you'll note, the strength of something is often the weakness of something, because when you pick something to prioritize, that's going to be something that you prioritize. So that's the piece for J. Judy, can you show us the picture of map J that we're presenting? So the first picture here is the whole county. And the red lines are the current commissioner districts. Those are the 2011 boundaries that were drawn. And then the colored pieces are going to show you what's proposed here with map J. And the next slide is a zoom in on the Eugene-Springfield metro area where you see the streets identified, and you can really get in there and see exactly what are some of those specifics for pieces. And then map Q is our next map. Again, you've got the strengths and weaknesses here. We're looking forward to the question period that we're going to get to have with you guys in a few minutes. Let's take a look at what Q looks like, Judy. So here's Q in the big picture with the whole county. And then the next one is going to be that zoom in on the metro area for Eugene-Springfield. You can see those pieces. And then our last map that we have, our third map, is map C. And so we've got the strengths and weaknesses for that here, and then the pictures for it following. That's the whole county. And then the metro area zoom is right there. All right, so the next slide we have for you is, I believe it's our population summary. And here's where I'm going to hand it over to my vice chair, Nat. So Nat's going to take these next slides.
Okay, I believe I am unmuted. Awesome, thank you. Hello, everyone, greetings. We wanted to provide a summary of the population changes of each map. So on the top left table here, that is the existing district boundaries. And I do want to point out that when the 2011 maps were created, we also, or they had agreed to as well, a 1% population variance. And that I do want to specify is a plus or minus 1% variance. So you can see that Lane County did grow. Every district grew over the last 10 years. Districts 4 and 3 have the highest growth, and then we had 5, 1, and 2. And basically each map addressed all of our criteria and considerations differently, but we wanted to just ensure to you all that with the changes presented and our agreed upon 1% plus or minus variance, each of these maps are within that range. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? And we also wanted to highlight the general descriptions of each district as these were discussed throughout our meeting. And they're labeled, or these are numbered with 1 as the West Lane, 2 as Springfield, 3 as South Eugene, 4 as North Eugene, and 5 as East Lane. And I just want to point out that we had a lot of different discussions about how to interpret these descriptions. And a lot of that focused on the generally comprised, emphasis on the generally, and the outside or comprised of or within the metropolitan area. And so a lot of the discussion was, what does generally mean and what is outside or within the metro area? And at one of our last meetings, as we again discussed this, someone requested, well, how do the maps compare in terms of change, looking at the urban growth boundary as one consideration of metro area? So our next slide is going to show that data. Thank you. And this was a report that was pulled after we had voted on our maps. So we did not know this information before voting on the maps. On the left table is the percent inside of the urban growth boundary. The leftmost chart is the current district. And so, yeah, thank you. You can kind of point there. So the current district is on the left, and then they're labeled in the order of our preference with J, Q, and C. Now, going off of our charter description, District 1 and 5 are supposed to be generally outside of the metro area. And so these are numbered 1 through 5. So 1 and 5 are the outermost columns of each one. So 2, 3, and 4 are supposed to be generally comprised of the metro area. Specifically though, 2 is supposed to be at the Springfield metro area. And so on the left table, we have the flip-flop. This is percent outside of the urban growth area. And so same setup here with the leftmost being the current map as it stands today with J, Q, and C in order next to that. And I also just want to say that, you know, every time we had a question, we asked for more information. And so I recommend, you know, if you all have more questions about how does this affect this, to follow up with staff, and they'll be supportive for you all. And I believe our next slide is for Judy.
Chair Bernie.
I'm sorry, I was muted out of respect for the presenters. Did you want to interrupt the presentation, Commissioner?
Just that last slide, were the percentages land area or population?
That was population based on the census information.
Thank you. It wasn't clear.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of wrapping up our presentation, we're at the end of the information that we're sharing for you. I just wanted to highlight a couple things, you know, as we have a public hearing coming up, we want to get participation and get folks looking at some of those maps. Our website is also listed here. We're going to be doing a press release and trying to get that feedback. We have this afternoon, we'll be working with LCOG to print some of the maps in a larger format and placing them throughout. You know, at least the county buildings are a little bit easier. Definitely our main public service building downtown, and trying to do some other key areas, Florence, maybe LCC, other areas. So if you have any other ideas, that would be helpful. But just trying to place those maps in areas where people can really review it. It's sometimes hard on a computer screen, I do admit. And then it had come up in in our last committee meeting, asking for a potential for an evening public comment or public hearing session as well. I do have that data and information for you as potential times that might work if you are interested in adding it. And again, it would be in addition to what we've said in the ordinance language of November 30th at 1:30. So that's a question for you. And I think that's everything. So we're at the point where we can hand it off back to you, Chair, and see if there's any other further questions or clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, I am muted. First off, I would really be remiss, excuse me, if on behalf of the entire board, I didn't thank you. I didn't thank, and forgive me, I hear Ms. Williams calling you Morgan and Nat, but I'll be formal because we don't know one another. But so Ms. Monroe and is it, how do I pronounce your last name, Natalie? Dibens?
Guidance.
Dibens. And Ms. Dibens, if you would convey to the entire independent redistricting committee the recognition that we all have of how many hours, it's volunteer, it's truly an exercise in democracy. It's not over yet. But nonetheless, thank you so much for your time and your commitment to this. Having said that, I have a question of clarification, and then commissioners may have comments or questions. I will remind commissioners, this is not when we deliberate. So this really would have to do with questions for the chair and vice chair of the IRC. And my first one is to Judy. Judy, did you say that you're recommending a date and time not to replace the November 30th, 1:30 p.m. time certain, but in addition to? Is that correct? So let's make sure we don't leave this without you telling us when that would be, because I think it would behoove us to plan for needing more time, even if we didn't need it. Commissioners, questions, comments for Ms. Monroe, Ms. Dibens, or Ms. Williams? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
I'll kick us off. Thank you, Chair. I also want to just personally extend my appreciation to the whole committee, to Ms. Williams for taking on a new, big, fast-moving project with an already full plate, and particularly to Ms. Monroe for chairing, and to Ms. Dibens for the backup as vice chair. But I know it probably called on every ounce of your facilitation skills, because you were also on your own steep learning curve on the content, as well as then the actual facilitation of the meeting. So thank you all for taking time away from the rest of your lives to do this work. It is very much appreciated and very much needed. And I feel really proud. It's a first step at doing things in a very different way at a time when really nationally, but also particularly here in Oregon, all eyes are on these redistricting processes to see how they can be done in a way that really does embrace transparency and integrity and community engagement. So thanks for being our guinea pigs on that. I also want to say that I'm very much looking forward to reading the process improvement notes and recommendations. Looking forward to that. I wanted to know if the slides that you just presented, and particularly the graphs with the UGB percentages and so on, could be also made available on the IRC website, so that we can revisit them and we can refer people to them. I see nodding yes. Great, thank you. And then just process question, maybe for Ms. Williams or Ms. Jones, is when the time comes to make a motion so that we can get to our public hearing and second reading, is whether we need to establish that evening hearing session if we're going to have it, and then whether the ordinance language needs to be amended to include a second public comment session in the ordinance that we will be voting on to move this forward to a second reading and hearing.
Yes, I can just briefly touch on that, and I can also pull up the screen when we get to that point. I did write it out if that's helpful, the motion, and I can see if I can address the additional, but the ordinance was specific to November 30th at 1:30 for the public hearing. So as long as we don't extend that and run into issues there, we can do it before. So we do have a proposed time that is before that date, but we can add that into the motion language that would get moved forward to make it very clear that that second reading is set for that.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you very much, Ms. Williams. And I can tell you that's not written into the draft motion I'm looking at. So we may want to do that. Other commissioners with questions or comments or discussion at this point? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I will echo the appreciation of the committee. I'm very sensitive that volunteers could be doing lots of other things with their lives, but appreciate the time that they've put in for the county. I noticed that the proposed date that was sent to our calendars is Monday, the 29th at 5:30, also known as Hanukkah. So I wasn't sure if that is still the proposed date or if this is a good time to delve into
that. Go ahead, Judy. Excuse me. Go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Buck. That's a great point. And
everyone's calling her Chair Buck. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Buck.
Yes.
We, given our timelines, it was trying to come up with a time. We have Veterans Day this week, trying to fit it in with we know there's AOC commitments as well. And so this was kind of the best opportunity. But I do note the concern with that day and time, trying to come up with something that is before that date. I can quickly try and see if there is another alternate option.
If I may, before that, is there a commissioner that has objection with that? If there is, we absolutely will. If there's not, there's not. Are there any commissioners with an, okay, Commissioner Trieger objects? Okay, thank you.
I think specifically, I appreciate Commissioner Buck bringing up, specifically because it is a holiday that starts at sundown. And if the whole purpose is an evening meeting, we are very explicitly creating an opportunity for public comment and leaving a great percentage of our community members out of the option. And it's the first night of Hanukkah, I will add. If it was later in the cycle, it might be a little different.
Well, Ms. Williams,
Chair,
I guess, yes, please.
Chair and Judy, I can propose we extend it, if it would help, to December 1st. If people are available December 1st in the evening, we could do continued public hearing and deliberations on the evening of December 1st as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I just have a process question. Is this in response, were commissioners requesting evening comment time? Did the committee suggest it? Where did the request, just given that we're still in this virtual environment, given that we're also receiving emailed, I'm just wondering what the demand or where this came from, just for my information, that would help me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioner Trieger. We've been trying to identify the time, and it's typically during the days. Typically our default is it either 9 a.m. as a time certain that might work, or 1:30 for board items, recognizing that occasionally there's some additional evening public hearings, maybe specific to land use. So this 1:30 time was chosen based on that, the board times and what might work best. The question came from a redistricting committee member in our last public meeting on the November 4th. And so it was just raised when I announced what time it was, given that he had raised that there was over 200 folks that presented at public hearing 10 years ago. So just trying to recognize if there's an opportunity for an evening option for folks that work, that would be one thing that was raised.
So at this point, if I may, let's end here. Let's end with, when the heck are we going to do it beyond this? And are there any more questions, or comments for Ms. Williams, Ms. Monroe, or Ms. Dybens as it relates to this item? And then we can schedule when we're through this discussion. No more? Okay, I guess we're back to that. If I may, Diana and Ms. Williams, do we have a last date what's our window here for scheduling a second meeting if necessary after the 30th.
Chair, if I may see if Steve Dingle's on the line and can chime in here. My understanding was because we've listed the ordinance as a first reading today, with that specific timeline called out, we were trying to meet that timeline. And so December 1st, I know that he was potentially able to call in. If not, I can try and text
Judy,
him.
I am texting him right now to try to get him on. He is currently not on.
While you're checking, Diana, I see that Commissioner Bozovich has his hand raised.
So I'm fully supportive of the evening public hearing on the 1st. It can be done as a continuation of the public hearing we're noticing for 1:30 times certain on the 30th. You know, if you don't adjourning the board meeting and we just continue the public hearing to the 1st, it can be handled under the notice and under this first reading.
Thank you, Commissioner. I also would have no problem with that, and it would seem that that would be another mechanism to deal with Commissioner Trieger's point, which is to make this as inclusive and transparent. And there's a lot of folks that might want to weigh in that work during the day and they're not going to have any other opportunity. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
I would be 30 to 40 minutes late on the 1st.
No matter what time we set it to start?
Right, if it started at 5, I'd be 30 to 40 minutes late. So start at 5:30, I'll be almost on time.
Yeah, Commissioner Trieger.
We can add an evening hearing before the 30th, though, correct? And so I understand the conflict with the AOC conference, but that does adjourn Thursday afternoon. There are no evening activities associated with that conference on that Thursday afternoon of the 18th. I don't know if that then runs us into not enough noticing time, but I'm just pointing that out since the conference was met.
Judy, this is Diana, and I've patched Steve Dingle in on my phone, so he is now part of the meeting. And just quickly, we cannot do the public hearing during the week of AOC because we have to have 13 days between today and the first public hearing. So Steve Dingle is on the line, but he has not heard the discussion. So if someone wants to paraphrase for him and ask him a question, he is ready to go.
Judy, did you have something? Otherwise, I think we're just logistically trying to pencil something in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think what we were just trying to confirm that Commissioner Bozovich pointed out was a question about, since we've listed the first reading and setting the second reading with very specific language for a public hearing on November 30th at 1:30, could we do a public hearing, an additional public hearing after the 30th? And Commissioner Bozovich mentioned that it could be a continuation of the first hearing that's on the 30th. And so just, I guess, clarification or confirmation, but I think we may have answered that.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's right. You can do it on, I'm doing the math in my head. So yes, that's more than 13 days, but you could certainly, I mean, that's always a possibility when we have these, is that there'll be another public hearing. So yes, you can do that.
I think we would look at the continued public hearing and possible deliberations on December 1st.
So Ms. Monroe and Ms. Divens, now you're getting a firsthand look at who really runs things here. Just kidding. Okay, do any commissioners have any objection to somehow modifying this motion so that it includes, or perhaps doesn't need to, and in their calendars, December 1st, 5:30 or 6, so that we have all 5 commissioners available? Does that work for everyone for December 1st? Let's do it. So I believe Ms. Williams or Ms. Divens or Ms. Monroe, before I call for a motion, is there anything else you would like to bring to the board's attention as it relates to this item? Okay. Just want to make sure you have a chance. Is there a motion? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, we actually have 3 different ordinances, so do we need 3 different motions?
I was told by Mr. Dingle, who I know will answer this question, that we only needed 1. Is that correct, Mr. Dingle?
That is correct, Chair Bernie. I gave you that in the script, yes.
Which I do not have the script, so I will fashion a motion based on what I do have.
And Chair and Commissioner, I just put it on the, sorry, I just put it on the screen that I'm sharing. There's a motion. I will make it a little bit bigger and larger, but it should encompass all of the pieces.
Right. I assume it's the board's intention to move all 3 things forward.
Right. So we need to modify the motion to include ordinance 2111, 2112, and 2113. The current motion only says 2111.
And Chair Bernie, I gave you the language. I sent it to you. I think it would have been about 8:30 or 8:45 your time, and I marked it high importance.
I got it. I'm looking at it. We're good.
I have a full motion as provided by Ms. Williams that I'm prepared to make.
Okay, Commissioner Farr, if you would.
And listen closely, Steve Dingle. Chair Bernie, I move to schedule a second reading and public hearing for ordinance 21-11 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map J, and 2112 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map Q, and 2113 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map C, and setting a second reading and public hearing for November 30th, 2021 for a time certain at 1:30 p.m. with a continued public hearing on December 1st for a time certain at 5:30 p.m.
Perfection. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Judy, you make me look really good. Thank you.
Well, she did until you admitted who was making it. It's been moved by Vice Chair Farr, and this time seconded by Commissioner Trieger. And I'm going to attempt to repeat the motion to schedule a second reading and public hearing for ordinance 21-11 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map J, and 2112 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map Q, and 2113 in the matter of reviewing and modifying the district boundaries for election of commissioners, map C, and setting a second reading and public hearing for November 30, 2021 for a time certain at 1:30. I can't read the rest, but I think it says continuation to December 1st at 5:30 p.m. Is there discussion to the motion? I see multiple thumbs. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing no discussion, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion made by Vice Chair Farr and seconded by Commissioner Trieger, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Let the excuse me, all those opposed? Commissioner Buck, are you available via phone or no? Technology. This is why she wants broadband out there. All those, the motion made by Vice Chair Farr and seconded by Commissioner Trieger has been approved 4 votes to 0. I can't state what Commissioner Buck would have voted, but she is unable to vote due to technology issues at this time. Ms. Williams, are we good?
We are good. Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioners. Thanks for your time, and thank you to Morgan Monroe, our Chair, Natalie Dybens, our Vice Chair, and the entire committee too. Thank you.
Ms. Monroe and Ms. Dybens, if you are going to be with us during these meetings, by the end of these meetings, hopefully you'll allow us to call you by first name too. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Judy. And by the way, Mr. Dingle, thank you I know at the very beginning, this really was imposed upon you to help us get organized. And thank you, commissioners, for making sure this was about as hands-off a process, so this truly was an independent redistricting commission. So thank you all very much. Moving on to the next item.
Au revoir.
Is that Irish? English? I believe that the only item left on our agenda before Ms. Jones reads us into executive session that we will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning is Mr. Mokrahaisi. I don't think we gave you any new assignments, but this is review of assignments. Do you have anything?
I don't have anything new, so unless I missed something, you can recess and we'll see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
He took the words out of my mouth. We're now recessed. Thank you, Commissioner.
No.
Oh, you're
to...
right. He didn't take, you know what? Blame it on him, Diana. Please read us into executive session.
Sure,
and before you do, I'm sorry, before you do, I believe Commissioner Farr needs to make a statement.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I wish to declare a potential conflict of interest. We will be discussing AFSCME general contract negotiations. My son is a steward for AFSCME and a member of that union, and I do not perceive an actual conflict of interest. So I will participate in the discussion tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrahaisi, for making me look bad there. And Ms. Jones, if you kindly read us into executive session.
This is the read-in for executive session for Wednesday morning, November 10th. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent, and to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.660 2A and D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. The board has the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, we are now recessed to reconvene at 9 a.m. in executive session. Have a good evening.